Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It's your boy Jack Slack, and we're kicking off the first show of 2018. So what's new? Well, there was UFC 219, there were 2 Rizin events, and I just spent the entire morning watching Wrestle Kingdom 12, which was really, really good. If you are a pro wrestling fan, or if you're not a pro wrestling fan, or if you're a pro wrestling fan who doesn't really watch it, New Japan, definitely watch it. The matches were absolutely stellar. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm a massive mark for Minoru Suzuki, mainly because of his days as a pancrase fighter. But his match on the show was exciting and brutal and awesome, and he's 50 years old, so that's really impressive. And then Chris Jericho, almost 50, came out and did a 35 minutes of work with Kenny Omega and stole the show. It was absolutely tremendous. Cannot recommend that enough. In fact, I was watching some of the undercard stuff, and there's a guy called Yano, who's considered like a comedy... Well, he is a comedy character, and he'll sort of like win by unsheathing the turnbuckle and moving out of the way, and the other guy will run into it, or he'll time a schoolboy or something like that. And he just seems like exactly the kind of guy that I would look for if pro wrestling were real. Someone with no moves, no moveset to speak of, but really good ring awareness. His ring craft is absolutely stellar. Gets poured all over your fella. Right, so what's going on? Lots of MMA publications phoning it in at the moment, just doing their Yearend Awards, and to be honest, I'm going to be doing mine too, but mine won't be phoned in because I will not be rehashing the same names that you've heard over and over. I'm not giving Demetrius Johnson Fighter of the Year for fighting 2 of his, well, let's call them weaker opponents to date. Someone asked me about him, why not give him Fighter of the Year, in your Yearend Awards, because he just broke the defense record, or tied the defense record, or whatever it is, with Anderson Silva. And you're thinking, well, that's not something that he achieved this year, the record. It's something that he walked over the line by fighting what's left of the division. I would give him Fighter of the Year last year, or one of the years when he beat decent opponents. Not, Wilson Hayes and Ray Borg, who are good fighters, but, even Rafael Dos Anjos has 2 wins over good welterweights and 1 win over a great welterweight this year. And welterweight's a far more competitive division, But anyway, that's my my standard disdain for people massively overrating Demetrius Johnson just to sort of virtue signal. Well, not even overrating him, but just giving him the props way too late, It's like when you get a lifetime achievement at the Oscars, because your Citizen Kane lost to How Green Is My Valley or some shit like that. But regardless, I don't do Fighter of the Year. I do a Most Improved Technical Fighter of the Year. I think I did Max Holloway and Robert Whittaker. I might do Rose Namajunas this year. I don't know. There's a few in the running. But I don't really go in for the whole best this year thing because you're comparing apples and oranges. I'm always going to be more impressed by wins in deep divisions where I know the talent is plentiful. Or I can see with my eyes that the talent is plentiful, But, whatever, let's move on. Recaps. UFC 219. This one was a weird one for me because I was sort of... I think I described it in my article at Vice as the UFC making the best of what they had. They didn't have anyone who could carry a pay-per-view. And I expect the numbers for this pay-per-view will be terrible. But they did have Cyborg, who was sort of a draw, even in weird fights against blown-up bantamweights. And Holly Holm, who is still carrying some residual rub from knocking out Ronda Rousey. Her name means more to the outsider, or the casual fan, for that, than it does for her 6 other performances in the Octagon, which were all really underwhelming. Unless you consider head-kicking Betch Correa after struggling through almost 3 rounds with her. Impressive. But, yeah, considering that it was like, make the most of what you have, they put it together, and I found myself begrudgingly going, I would watch that. And, the more I thought about it, the more interesting it was, because Cyborg has been very lazy in some of her fights. She will get really ugly and just start swinging at people and running after them. And, you see these snippets of work with Perillo and people like that and getting better. But she sort of swings down to the level of her opposition. Or rather, I wanted to know if she was swinging down to the level of her opposition or if she really wasn't that technically good. And by putting her in with Holly Holm, who was trying to be a difficult target and was lancing her with left straights and asking her questions, you got to see a more strategically, tactically sound side of Cyborg. She looked really good. She was counterpunching Holly Holm, which, you shouldn't be able to counterpunch a multiple-time world champion boxer that easily. It did really hammer home how one-note Holly Holm is in her attacks. It's the left straight from exactly the same angle over and over again. And I'm not saying mix it up like throw more hook kicks and shit, which is what she does when she feels like she needs to mix it up. I'm just saying move to a different position before you throw your basic punches. Throw a combination maybe once in a while that isn't left straight, right uppercut, left straight, like walking on a line. I like Holly Holm a lot. She seems like a great person, and obviously that Ronda Rousey performance was everything that I wanted to see, because it was showing how far ringcraft has to come in MMA. The ringcraft and her good work in the clinch, but the ringcraft mainly took apart this unbeatable, really getting up there in the hype sort of monster. But it does really hammer home to you, like watching Holly Holm fight, even in her boxing career, how different women's boxing is from men's boxing. You would not get to the top levels of men's boxing marching with your combinations and trained by a kickboxing coach. The highest level of boxing is so completely owned by guys who are specifically boxing coaches and have been doing that alone for years and years and years. It would be very hard to see someone with her skill set competing at the highest levels of the men's boxing game. However, right off the bat, she hit her with that check hook and got offline, which was really nice. Cyborg adapted well in that she was eating left straights as she walked forward for like the first half of the opening round, and then she began to time the right hand immediately afterwards. And this is the thing, like, if you don't move your head after you fight, this is the point of a double end bag. When I was making Ringcraft, The Fall of Ronda Rousey the other day, I was looking through this compilation of her training with Edmund, and all of it's on the mitts, standing right in front of him, and then he'll step off to the side, wait for her to catch up, and then go, and let her hit the pads again, and then slowly walk off to the side. It's hit, pause, pivot, pause, hit. But I was watching her on the double end bag, and she's doing that stuff that you see Shane Mosley and Floyd Mayweather do, where they just flick in the bag, it's not really even moving. But she's not moving her head at all, and those guys are going through the motions, but they're moving their heads. The whole point of the double end bag is that you hit it, it comes back at you, and you say, that's a punch. So you're hitting and moving your head. And Holly Holm was throwing this left straight, and her head would be straight there, and she'd eat the counter right hand. And obviously, Cyborg hits a lot harder than her, and it really puffed up the side of her face. I did say I wanted to see low-line side kicks and oblique kicks from Holm, because they are so much better for dealing with, someone pressuring forward. You can watch the is it Urena? Bars? I know her name's Bars, but I can't remember her first name. You can watch the Bars match, the kickboxing match that Cyborg lost to a much taller, much better kickboxer. And Bars is hitting her with teeps up the middle and jabs, but every time she throws a kick, whether it's a teep or a round kick, Cyborg steps in on her and pushes her to the ropes. And that's the thing about kickboxing. If you go and watch two top ties against each other, the ring ropes and stuff like that, not a huge concern. Guys are just letting their kicks be caught, and then they'll keep their knee between them and the opponent, and they'll bounce around on one leg. They'll fight off one leg. Yod Sinclair's knocked people down off one leg. But in the ring in boxing, it's a much bigger concern to move your feet and get out of the way and stuff. So I didn't like the idea of her round kicking, so she didn't do much of that. I mean, she did do a couple, and there were some nice openings for round kicks. I think certainly towards the end, Cyborg's right elbow was quite far away from her body, and if Holm had stepped offline with a right hook and thrown the left body kick a few times, I think she probably could have put in some good winding shots there. But again, with round kicks, you're playing such a dangerous game against someone who just wants to step in on you and smash you. So can't judge her for doing that. Really just wanted more variety out of her hands, And then it was Cyborg who landed the jabs in the fourth and fifth round, and Holm didn't show a single one all fight. What was surprising was that Holm absolutely held her own in the clinch. And the size disparity was not that big. It was mainly a power disparity in the hitting. In the clinch, Holm pushed her straight to the fence, flattened her out there. Cyborg didn't do anything, couldn't do anything. The problem is that Holm's clinch seems like almost entirely defensive. She's obviously spent so much work worrying about being taken down and then training for Ronda Rousey, of course, that she can shut down anyone in the clinch but doesn't do anything with it. So she's got her spread on the fence like Czech Congo and just starts kneeing the thigh like once every half a minute. Get some decent tinies on that girl. And a couple of nice trips so that you can try and grab the double collar tie or a single collar tie and work knees. You'll have a beast on your hands. Because she tied up Shevchenko and Durandamy, no problems when she wanted to. It's just that she had nothing to do from there, so we were treated to this tedious wall and stall. Though her shorts were too small, so we got some nice underbun out of it. Just, why would you wear those? Mind you, the outfitting policy was bizarre all night. Carla Esparza, they've got a uniform now, and she still managed to turn up looking like she'd come straight off a regional card. She used to wear the singlet. Now she's wearing an actual string vest. It looked awful. And you're going, this is a professional... And it had the Reebok logo on, so you're assuming this professional sports apparel company made it for her. That fight... Really just not going to go too much into that. It was just pumping of hands. Right hands constantly and eating right hands. It's a good thing neither of them really hit with much power. Women's strawweight, innit? Tim Elliott showed a sick Anaconda. In fact, he showed his usual 6 scrambles. And he got his wrist bitten at one point. I don't think we spoke about Jason Knight biting that dude's finger. That was absolutely bizarre. Sometimes people's wrist will get caught in between your lips and on your teeth, when you're grappling and things like that. But yeah, pretty weird that it's never happened, and it happened twice within a couple of events. In the UFC, that is. Yeah, Elliott was really fun. Good debut at bantamweight. Obviously not a particularly well-regarded opponent, but then that was the case with the other big bantamweight debut, which we'll be talking about later, Rizin boy. Loved his Anaconda. You're seeing this more and more, the Anaconda, and then bringing the legs to use the thigh to scoop the elbow inwards and put the shoulder closer to the neck. That's something that Rafa Mendes made famous. He used to do these rolling Anacondas. He spent his whole match against Leo Vieira in 2009 just looking for that from the top of half guard. He gets the front headlock, forward rolls so that he's like north head to head with the opponent, both looking up at the ceiling, and then he'll bring himself back over, scoop the elbow across with his leg, and lock in the Anaconda. And you're seeing a lot of those now, or more of them now in MMA. You're seeing a lot of them in no-gi grappling. But the other one that happened the other day was Brian Ortega. Looked for it twice, I think. That was the one where Cub Swanson got out by the skin of his teeth. His eyes were so wide when he was in that Anaconda. Magne versus Condit was alright. I mean, Condit, I've been saying that he should hang it up since before the Alves fight. Well, actually, after the Alves fight. Because everyone was obsessed with the elbows that he landed in that, but he looked awful up to that point. Alves had just been tearing him apart on counter because he'd been throwing these marching combinations and getting clipped every time. But then he had that weird fight against Robbie Lawler where he almost won the title by kick spam. Leg jabs, who remembers those and all the controversy that caused. And then he had that fight with Maia. But he's back again. Fought Magne. Magne did good. Took him down. Magne did, in fact, both men, when they did a double jab, really got the better of the other man. Condit showed a double jab for like the first time in his career and got Magne to the fence and hit him with a few shots at one point. And Magne has a really good jab, actually, and a really good one too, but he doesn't really get comfortable using them until way late in the fight. If you watch his fight with Hector Lombard, once he starts getting his range with the jab, he's so good. Or it looks so good, rather. But he throws a double... There's a few occasions in the third round, I believe, where he double jabs. Condit leans all the way back, has nowhere to go, and then the right hand hits Condit like square on the face. The double jab, just the best weapon. If you know how to use it, it's your key to making the opponent show what they're going to do. And then they're stuck with what they were doing. Or they're going to have to come back to a neutral position from where they were. Either way, you've got a great chance of cracking them. Much better than if you're just throwing at them and they're moving to that position. Khabib versus Barbosa in the co-main. Obviously, the one everyone wants to talk about. the ring cutting was nowhere to be seen. Like, he just ran at him. And Edson Barbosa absolutely could have done better in this fight with better footwork. If you saw in the third round, no, not the third round, whenever he was absolutely knackered and started using his hands, he did much better than when he was trying to quick switch and throw these round kicks at really, while the range was collapsing and Khabib was just stepping in on top of him. Round kicks, as we already said, you got a great chance of the guy stepping up the middle, but anytime you kick, you're getting onto one leg, and there's that moment where you're not able to move and the other guy's still moving forward. So you're just losing distance constantly. But when he used his hands, they were good, and then he forgot to pivot offline afterwards and immediately got smashed into the cage after landing like a 4-punch combo. And his body shots were good too. I think that's going to be a good idea against Khabib. Just look for the body shots. The wonderful thing about body shots against an advancing fighter, firstly, it's tiring to be advancing all the time, especially if you're running, literally jogging, as Khabib was. But secondly, when you're hitting the body, you can turn that into a stiff arm on the body. You know, you're not going to miss the body, hopefully, unless you're really not doing well. But you punch someone in the head as they're moving forwards. 1, they can move their head. 2, their hands could be in the way. 3, it could just slide off their head. You know, slide off the top of their skull. Rousey caught so many people in the clinch after they'd hit her on the top of the head. You hit someone in the body, you know you're going to hit them in the body, and then you immediately push them off. That's why the jab to the chest is such a brilliant one against an ultra-aggressive fighter. On the ground, Khabib's passing was absolutely gorgeous. You know, he did that thing where he took the legs round, pointed the knees up to the ceiling, and then just sat over them into the mount at one point. That was incredible. Does lots of smash passing, you know, mounting the legs. He did the thing where you grapevine them out and they're sitting on the fence so that they can't wall walk up. And that typically is what we refer to as laming it out. Hendricks did it to Lawler. Tons of people did it to KJ Noons, which is partly why I hate it so much. But mainly it's just holding people there. Oh, Jason Miller did it to... Was it Jake Shields? Or no, Michael Bisping. And Jake Shields did it to Mayhem. But it's basically sitting on their feet, not letting them have their knees free, but not mounting any offense because he can't really hit from there. Or we thought you couldn't really hit from there. But what Khabib does, and he did this in the Johnson fight and in the Barbosa fight, he'll brace his hand on their collarbone or their throat if he's feeling really nasty, and he'll throw the uppercut. And the uppercut is almost never an option on the ground, and it is now. Like, it's just so cool watching him do it. So that further complicates the title picture. Best thing they could do: book the Tony versus McGregor fight, throw a ton of money at Nate Diaz, have him come back and fight Nurmagomedov, or fight Nurmagomedov rather, because I can't see him winning that fight. But if you pay him a ton of money, he'll do it, and then any of the rub that still exists for him will then transfer to Khabib. But that would be the smart thing to do. So they probably won't do that. They'll probably have Tony versus Khabib and let Conor pursue a fight with GSP or something equally stupid. Equally more stupid. Yeah, that's a phrase. But yeah, not a bad event overall, I thought. Oh, I forgot to mention Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, my actual performance of the night. I thought he did a brilliant job. I had my eye on him because he was so cerebral. Triple H, the cerebral assassin. Now, he's so thoughtful and on point against Ross Pearson. You know, Ross Pearson likes to slip and counter, so he stood him up with long kicks, drew him out into these leaps, countered him when he leapt, stabbed him with straight punches when he could keep him standing up. Finally, when Pearson jumped to try and reach him and then ducked out the side door, Hooker hit him with a knee and knocked him out. And I like Ross Pearson a lot, but I thought that was a really impressive performance. Obviously, Ross Pearson's lost a lot of fights, but that wasn't like him getting caught. That was Hooker saying, these are all the things I know you do, I'm going to take them away from you. And those are the kind of matches that really impress me. So he was fighting Mark Jacasey, who loves to kneecap people. Timu Thingy still hasn't fought. He had to pull out of his last fight due to a knee injury. You can see his knee get injured against Jacasey, and he immediately runs in and gets countered and knocked out. Yeah, you know, it's always going to be mixed feelings on those kicks because they are so useful, but equally so dangerous. But Hooker and Cyborg in the main event both showed that you can just take your leg away. And they did a really good job of that. And Hooker was feinting wonderfully. Jacasey was looking to do, you know... I love using the phrase black explosive. Sorry, I'm going to use it again. Black explosive stuff, you know. That he's going to step in and I'm going to jump for a 2-touch back kick knockout. And he did that a couple of times, just jumping at the air because Hooker was feinting at him. And looking for these big counters that weren't there. So then he had to settle down, got a little bit worried, spooked, started diving for takedowns that weren't there. got reversed at the end of round 1 on a takedown, was taken down and had his back taken in the second, and rushed for a takedown in the third and got guillotined off it. That, like, Danaher style one with the arm all the way through, power guillotine. So yeah, that was a really good performance. I'm doing Boy Watch for December at the moment, and Dan Hooker is most certainly in there for that performance. Anyway, quick plug and then we'll do some questions. For the Patreon boys, the new Patreon lecture, Floyd Patterson and the Madness of Customato, is now up. You can go and listen to that. I think it's about an hour and a half. I can't remember, but it is pretty good. It's all about Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson and a little bit of Cassius Clay sneaking in there at the end, Sonny Liston, Customato and what a nutter he was, the peekaboo style of boxing and how it differs from the classical style of boxing, or the styles of boxing that were familiar at the time. And it's just a great story. It's about a guy who shouldn't be, well, a lot of people thought, overachieved in becoming the world champion. They thought he was a blown-up middleweight. And then when he lost the world title, they thought that was confirmation of that. And then he came back and won it back. And then he almost won it back a third time, but was gypped by the bizarre rules in Sweden. But that's all in the podcast, so go give that a listen. Or if you can't, get on the Patreon and then give that a listen. If you haven't bought my book, Notorious, do it. And if you haven't bookmarked the primer, thefightprimer.com, do that, because Boy Watch is coming there, or a new Boy Watch is coming there. And I'm also starting a couple of new series, Fantasy Matchmaker, which I'm going to do after events. Just sort of talking about not just who would be a logical next step, but also I'm going to do things like pushing the envelope, who I would match someone with stylistically, the highest ranked opponent I could see them being a bad stylistic matchup for, who I would have them avoid if I wanted to push them along, and who I would put them in with if I wanted to see them tested, and so on. We're going to offer multiple types of matchup for each person who's just won a fight or lost a fight. The other new series coming there is my new International Prospect Watch. Haven't thought of the name for it yet. Might just be International Prospect Watch. Might be the Fight Primer's Prospect Watch. Might be Jack Slack's Prospect Watch. But we're going to be talking about the various fighters who are outside of the UFC and Bellator. And, not Kyoji. So, the ones who aren't getting the publicity, but who are very much exciting prospects. There's a lot of Ruskies in there. There's a lot of Russians in there. But there's a lot of interesting people out there. It's when you see guys like Manel Cape come out and surprise you with how much punishment they can take and things like that, and you're thinking, oh, this guy might have a future. There's tons of guys out there who are already, proving themselves, and just haven't made their way to the UFC yet. And certainly in the Eastern European scene, a lot of guys aren't really seeing it as necessary to go to the UFC nowadays, or even stateside nowadays. But yeah, that should be fun. Fightprimer.com. Now let's do some questions. Remember, if you have any questions you want to send to the podcast, send them to fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. Dear Sensei Slack, do you cringe as hard as I do every time a fighter begs for a post-fight bonus during the post-fight interview, especially when someone has put on a performance truly deserving of that extra reward? It seems to me that asking for it diminishes the accomplishment, as if they are the only fighter on the roster who could benefit from the life-changing money. Also, which avenue of me purchasing Notorious puts the most money in your pocket? MJ. Wherever you buy it new. And, I don't like... It gets a bit old, but then it's getting a bit old that everyone comes to the post-fight interview with a call-out. They're not really necessary. Like, the post-fight interview generally. You're interviewing a guy who's normally tired and not entirely with it. But the bonus system is just fucked up anyway. I mean, they renamed it Performance of the Night, but it is still essentially Knockout of the Night, because they don't like giving it to submissions unless they're really, incredible. And they just changed the name because it was glorifying CTE, or glorifying giving people CTE. Rafael Dos Anjos absolutely deserved the Performance of the Night against Robbie Lawler. I don't think anyone could argue that he wasn't the most impressive all-around performance on the card. Every element of mixed martial arts, every area of the game, he showed something technical and savvy, and he really put it on a top-level welterweight. But they gave the two Performance of the Night bonuses to knockouts that I don't remember being that good. Nadim Taleb, the one where he didn't really do anything, and it ended in like a minute. And then the lad who had to chase Barbosa, the Bang Boss, his performance was rubbish. He just ran around trying to follow him and didn't really do anything, and then finally caught him with a knee coming in with his head low, and then he got performance of the night. So it's not really performance of the night at all. Rubbish might have been a bit strong, but he certainly didn't do anything that was remarkable from a performance perspective. Dear Jack, been loving all the Patreon history episodes, and I'm eagerly awaiting the Floyd Patterson Custom Arto episode. I'll start with the slightly grisly request. Have you ever considered doing a history episode on early duelists/fighters who fought with weapons, such as Fior de Liberi, which is a name that I feel I should know, Miyamoto Musashi, everyone knows that one, or some notable gladiator. There we go. He ran out too. I think I'd enjoy that very much. I think I'd very much enjoy your impassioned yet sarcastic telling of wherein people get sliced up and whatnot. Yeah, I think that could be fun, but again, it's an area of history where I'm just not nearly as experienced as this stuff. Boxing and MMA history I've been reading about and following and part of, I suppose, in some way, for the best part of several decades. Whereas I know Musashi, and I am very much interested in the history of duelists and things like that, but I don't have any great in-depth knowledge of that. The other problem is that when you do try and look up people like Sasaki Kojiro, I was interested in him because even with Musashi, I'm like, why is he notable? Who did he fight? Not like how many did he win? But Sasaki Kojiro, you read legendary swordsman known for his very long sword. And then you go, okay, he's legendary, but why? Nothing's been written about him otherwise. Or certainly I didn't find anything when I was briefly perusing. Finding sources could be hard, especially for Italian swordsmen and Japanese swordsmen in English. Unfortunately, I have not been gifted with language skills, and I spent no time trying to learn them. However, the links between fencing and various armed methods and unarmed fighting are very interesting. The first martial arts manuals that contain unarmed techniques are military manuals that refer to, they'll have like 18 chapters on fighting with different weapons and then a chapter on fighting with your fists. Jonathan continues. Secondly, I was rewatching old Fight Quest episodes on YouTube, and I saw this scene where Jimmy Smith was training Kaju Kempo, and doing this drill wherein he and his opponent were squared up in a closed stance matchup, attempting to, in turn, slip their head outside of the opponent's right hand, but not very deep, and return fire back with a crisp right hook to the bicep of the punching arm. Jimmy Smith was making it look like some worthless bullshit, but his partner was hitting his bicep with crisp, accurate strikes that looked like they had some stank on them. Though it's impossible to know exactly how long it took because of editing, Jimmy Smith started dropping his arm, grimacing, complaining, and became basically incapable of throwing a respectable punch. I feel the bicep punch would definitely be unexpected. You're always talking about taking weapons away from your opponents over the distance, and what's better than taking away their ability to lift their arms? What do you think of it as shown in that drill, i.e. at distance? I'm skeptical. Also, can you think of a way that it would be somewhat safely and reliably applied throughout a fight, maybe from the clinch or in some grappling scenario? Thanks for reading. Please keep the stuff coming. Jonathan. Yeah, hitting the arms is always going to be a good option. The famous example is Roland Estaza, very good defensive boxer. Rocky Marciano was having a nightmare with him, so he just started hammering his arms until his arms started coming down. Punching the arms is super legit. Like, if they fill with lactic acid or blood or whatever, they start to bruise up and swell, it's going to be really tricky to work at the same sort of speed that you otherwise could. Boxers become arm weary over the rounds anyway. If you can make that worse by piling on some swelling, that's great. The other thing about punching the arms and shoulders particularly is that it nicely you can jerk the opponent's body around a little bit, which is quite nice. If you say like that drill, if you slip a right hand and throw your right hand into the opponent's shoulder, you can square them up with some force as you come back with the left hook. You're taking away the timing that they would have had to use for their left hook and forcing them round into position sooner. So that's quite cool stuff like that. Kicking the arm is always going to be invaluable. More important in things like Muay Thai, but Shinya Aoki did it to Victor Ribeiro, Shaolin. Because if you're kicking on the arm, it's a lot harder to catch than if you're kicking at the head or something and they put their arm in the way and are ready to scoop it up. Yodson Klai broke a couple of arms, I can remember. Wow, I've mentioned Yodson Klai twice on this podcast without even meaning to. That's quite cool. But yeah, just hammering the arm is a good option, especially with kicks. I do like kicks to the arm. Badr Hari got his arm broken by Rico Verhoeven in a knee in a clinch with a knee, so that was bizarre. Big fan of wearing dudes' arms out. I mean, GSP famously, part of their strategy against Penn the second time to slow him down was to try and make him use his arms in the clinch, lean on him, make him carry George's weight a bit, and thereby slow down his jab. I'm going to recommend a book that I always love recommending for this, Champ Thomas's Outlaw Killer Punches. There's a whole section on hammering the arms and various little counters and points that you can try and hit them in specific areas. It goes from wide arm swing with the wrist, like Koteuchi in karate, against the guard, to like shorter little digs to the inside of the bicep on the inside and things like that. But yeah, I think there's value to it. I just think it takes some training to pull off. At least consistently rather, without brute forcing it, like just swinging at the arm over and over again. Good day to you, Jaximus Slaximus Maximus. I find that name wizable. Recently I have been watching a lot of Prince Naseem Hamed, and I am intrigued by his hands-down style, his ability to generate insane amounts of power into his lead uppercut, and his affinity for sprinting punches. If you could find it in your omnipotent, crumpet-consuming heart, a breakdown of his style would be much appreciated. Connor bless you, boy forever, Stefan. I think I wrote something about Prince Naseem a while back, like how Prince Naseem became the king of boxing, pissed everyone off. But yeah, he's a very interesting character, and all of Brendan Ingle's lads from like that era are very interesting. Mainly because the stance switching, they don't use two stances as in Orthodox and Southpaw. Brendan Ingle insists that they use 5 stances. Southpaw and Orthodox both side on and square, and then truly square, which is feet level. And if you watch Naseem's match against, I think it's Steve Robinson, the one where he actually wins his world title, that is his absolute best performance. He shows everything, and he's using his jab, he's backhanding it in, pecking with it, pulling away, throwing counters, hitting the body. And it's everything that was great about Prince Naseem, and then it really disappears, especially after he stops working with Ingle. He's just throwing the leaping lead uppercut, and he starts to look really bad. Anyway, cheers, Stefan. Let's talk about Rizin before we wrap up for today, because there isn't anything going on this weekend. But Rizin was really good. The great Kyoji Horiguchi, who I just wrote an enormous piece for Vice about, I believe I called it Ronin or something like that. You know, the Wandering Samurai stuff was too obvious to ignore. But yeah, he's basically a fighter in exile. He's good enough to be in the UFC. He's good enough to be top 5 in the UFC in his division. And he could continue growing to challenge Demetrius Johnson. You know, he was rushed into the first challenge. He's a guy who really needed to get to a better grappling team. And he's found that with ATT. So for those of you not in the know, this was a 2-part event. It was taking place on the 29th and 31st. So you got your New Year's Eve thing, but you've also got an earlier event. First round of this tournament was back in June. It's bantamweight tournament, so Kyoji's gone up in weight, decked the aged Hideo Takuro. And in this tournament, he went through Gabriel Oliveira, who'd just beaten Tatsuya Kawajiri, Manel Cape, and Shintaro Ishiwatari. The ring got in the way in every single bout, and then it got in the way in a new way when it cut Ian McCall's head open while he slid along it, before a single meaningful strike had been thrown in the fight, which is why Manel Cape made it past Ian McCall, and he celebrated as if he'd done like the unthinkable and he just knocked Ian McCall out with one punch or something like that. It was the most ridiculous shit. He's being marketed as like a talented crazy horse, but yeah. What else happened on the cards though that was interesting? Because like I said, I wrote a huge piece on Kyoji you can go read. Jiri Prochatska, whose name I can never say. I quite enjoy him. He rallied from behind to knock out Karl Albrechtsen in a very merciful stoppage for Japanese MMA. It was a standing TKO, which is, not too common, because they normally wait until you've fallen down and then maybe you get soccer kicked, or maybe you're lucky. Cindy Dandois beat King Raina, not the Rena that we all know and love, but the bigger lass who beat Jazzy Gabert. Split decision. Cindy Dandois, usual striking on display from her. Hiroyuki Takaya was around, got a unanimous decision. Quite nice, because he's an old guy. And then not much really happened on that first event. Wasn't too interesting. On the second event, however, you had the Women's Atomweight Grand Prix, which was actually pretty interesting. Reina TKO'd her first opponent because she's Reina, and she's easily the best striker that they're going to put her in with. Or always going to be better than whoever they put her in with. And then Kana Asakura, who, I don't know how old she is, but she's got like 20 fights and she looks like a schoolgirl. It's bizarre. But she submitted Maria Oliveira by armbar and then got on Rena's back and submitted her by rear naked choke in the final of the tournament and just burst into tears and was running all over the ring. It was adorable. And it was one of those nice MMA moments where the winner is crying and the loser is smiling. You don't get those too often. I think Krokop versus Nogueira is another one. There's just those moments where they're both on the floor looking at each other and the winner is like, sorry, but so happy. And the loser's like, no, don't worry about it. And is also really happy for them. Quite sweet. Tenshin Nasukawa, I really didn't care for this event because they brought in two guys, one of whom made his professional kickboxing debut that night, and the other guy had lost half the fights that he'd been in. Had a Letway title, but any kickboxing world title means nothing, really. There's so many of them going around. But it was people like, why can't he beat up some guys below his level? He's only 20. And it's not because, I'm not saying I'm worried about his skills atrophying. It's super douchey to keep a world level bantamweight fighter proven, knocked out like world champion ties. It's super douchey to keep him fighting guys who are below his level, so far below his level that he's going to score the knockouts. It's what they did with Michael Venom Page, and I hate them for doing that. But at least Michael Venom Page, when he did fight someone decent, it was lackluster, and there's that sort of like, oh, back off a bit, and we'll have him fight some more schlubs. Tenshin Nasukawa has beaten some of the best in the world, and they're still putting him in with these guys to pad his highlight reel, basically. So people were all on Facebook being like, when are we going to get a breakdown of that, Jack? I'm not going to give you a breakdown of that. You should know when this stuff is clearly set up to make one guy look silly. And those are the fights that I just don't give a shit about, because it means nothing if you win one of those. Krokop versus TK was even worse. 50-year-old TK versus Krokop, who, even though he's not a top heavyweight anymore, he did just beat King Mo and win the Openweight Grand Prix. Whereas TK was, firstly, not always that good, and secondly, had been out of the game for upwards of a decade and is 50 years old. Just disgusting. Takanori Gomi's bout with Yusuke Yachi was good fun. I know Yachi. I met him back in the day. Is he Crazy B? I don't know, but I have met him before. He didn't used to have like the long hair though. And yeah, I was really impressed by him. Also, he's packed on some muscle since I last saw him. But yeah, he looked good. Immediately came out and tried to blow the jaws off Gomi because everyone knows that Gomi's chin is gone. Gomi cracked him with some body shots and sent him to half guard. He just pulled half guard in pain. And then Gomi blatantly got double wrist control, pushed the arms away from Yachi's head and nutted him. And it was a really loud one too. And everyone in the audience was like, oh, and the commentators were like, oh, and the ref didn't notice. And he did it a couple of times too. I'd never seen Gomi headbutt someone, but he did it a couple of times in this fight to try and get ahead. Ultimately got choked out with a triangle. Looked like he was just going to try and catch the head and look for the arm, which you can do sometimes if you're like losing the shoulder. You can twist the arm back towards the ceiling and try and extend and get the arm, but he ultimately locked in the choke, got the finish. Yachi, interesting fighter, really good power. I didn't like quite how wild he was in this fight. I think he could have gone about overwhelming him a little bit more nuanced in his style, but he's shown some good looks in the past. He's actually, I've got him lined up for an episode of that Prospect Watch because he interests me a lot. And then, of course, the weirdest bit was Gavin Garcia missing weight in her gimme fight. You know, they're giving her patsies. Fucking, what's his name? Sakakibara, the CEO or whatever of Rizin, did an AMA the other day, and he was like, well, the thing is, there's not a lot of people at that weight class. And I was like, are they all over 40? You know, that's not how it works. Oh yeah, there was a massive spike in people interested in MMA at that weight 20 years ago, but nowadays, no one cares about it. Just, the guy is full of shit. Like, someone asked him what he thought about the UFC not using pride gloves because of the eye pokes, and he was like, well, you know, sometimes I get the feeling that the UFC doesn't want to push themselves or improve constantly. And I just replied, yeah, weird how you can watch someone get injured dozens of times the same way, and dozens of matches interrupted by the same thing and not do anything and not change anything, with a gif of guys falling through the ring. And then on this card, every single fight was hindered by the ring in some way. Kyoji Horiguchi against Gabriel Oliveira. He was climbing to mount on Gabriel Oliveira, and his leg went over the rope and he had to retreat. In fact, the ref pushed his leg back out. Against Cape, several times he was tied up tied up in it on the ground. And then against Ishiwatari in the final, he basically knocked him out on the other side of the ring post, and the referee couldn't see it. Also, it just makes it really hard to hit people. The other semi-final between Ishiwatari and the guy in the purple shorts, the guy in the purple shorts, his head was over the top of the bottom rope. So, like, the guy couldn't just punch straight down on him. He had to try and loop it around the middle rope. Just the stupidest thing you can do for your event, have the ring. It is nostalgia purely. I've had some guys try and tell me why it's better, but aside from the view for ringside seats, you know, if you're in a any kind of auditorium or arena where there's sloped seating, you know, there's only a few that are actually going to be affected by having a ring, or benefit from having a ring, that is. But the pageantry was all there. It was amazing. They had the BDSM opening, which I said in my article was part Eyes Wide Shut and part the gay steel mill from The Simpsons. Fair play to Nobuhiko Takada. He is ripped for a 55-year-old dude. And then he got the nappy out and everyone was pleased for that. I like Rizin. I really do. There's a lot of shit I don't like. You know, the stuff that didn't work, or, you know, the stuff that... There's two kinds of Japanese MMA fan. There's the kind that I consider myself, which is like, I really loved Pride, and I love I am super nostalgic for the presentation, but there's a lot of things about Pride that I just wouldn't want to see anymore, like the horrendous mismatches and the same guys at age 40 or 50. And then there are the kind who really are just into that, and they're the fucking worst. I would love Rizin to become a viable alternative. I would love to have Kyoji find some proper competition and for that to carry on, but I just... 4 events a year tops, going to be hard. But we'll see what they can do. I think, you know, there's certainly been interest in that. Their TV ratings have been pretty good. And while everyone says that, you know, the Japanese love a fad, and this is just... MMA was just a mega fad for them, I think that you'll probably see... I think that there's evidence that there's a bigger market for this than was originally thought. Anyway, no event this weekend, so we'll talk about Jeremy Stevens versus Doo Ho Choi. Decent fight on its own, but like, what is that as a headliner? We'll talk about that next week and answer a lot of questions, I suppose, and we'll find some interesting stuff to talk about. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon, buy the book, visit the Fight Primer because there's going to be some unique stuff coming there soon, and Connor bless. Cheers.